deaf millionaire humiliated at a cafe, until a single dad revealed the truth behind her silence. Monday mornings in downtown San Francisco rarely offered softness, and this one was no exception. Inside a handcrafted cafe tucked along Market Street, the coffee grinder screeched louder than any conversation. Customers crowded in, rushing to grab their drinks before work, while baristas darted around like arrows. Through all that noise, Aria Voss walked in. Tall, composed, elegant, her blonde hair pulled back, her navy overcoat tailored to perfection. Despite the chaos, she radiated calm. She stepped up to the counter, placed her hands gently on the wood surface, and began to sign her order. Oat milk latte, no sugar. The barista, a young man with impatience written all over his face, stared at her like she was speaking an alien language. If you can't talk," he snorted, "maybe you shouldn't be ordering here." A few nearby customers chuckled, others averted their eyes. No one intervened. No one stood up for her. Aria didn't react. Her expression stayed composed, but something flickered near her eyes. A quiet, familiar ache of someone who had learned to expect misunderstanding, even ridicule. Across the room, Ethan Ward sat with his daughter, Lila. The 8-year-old, her pastel-patterned backpack still on her shoulders, was drawing on a sheet of paper. She couldn't hear the chaos around her, but she observed everything. Her gaze locked onto Aria, then she tugged her father's sleeve. Lila signed, "Dad, she's like me." Ethan looked up. The moment he saw Aria, he noticed what others missed: the slight tilt of her head as she read lips, the tiny hearing aid behind her ear, and the defensive calmness that people who live in silence often carry like armor. He stood. Each step was steady, neither hurried nor hesitant. When he reached her, he gently began to sign. "What would you like?" Aria's head snapped toward him, her eyes widening with surprise. For a moment, disbelief washed over her. Then the tension in her face softened. She signed back, slow and grateful. "Oat milk latte, no sugar." Ethan turned to the barista, his voice low but sharp. "She ordered an oat milk latte. Make it?" The barista's smirk vanished instantly. While they waited, Lila stepped closer to Aria. With the bold honesty only children possess, she signed, "You're beautiful." Aria blinked rapidly, then smiled, a real smile, warm and unguarded. "You are too," she signed back. When the drink was finally placed on the counter, Aria reached into her coat and pulled out a business card. She set it in front of Ethan, signed, "Thank you," and walked out into the cold morning light. Ethan looked down at the card. Aria Voss, CEO, Voss Dynamics. His chest tightened. Voss Dynamics, the very company connected to the accident that killed Maya, his wife. A normal morning suddenly felt like a storm had cracked open. Before pain reshaped him into the quiet man he had become, Ethan Ward was a living legend in Silicon Valley. He was the prodigy of artificial intelligence, the founder of Ward Innovations, the visionary who revolutionized predictive robotics and became the youngest billionaire in the AI industry. The media praised him, investors idolized him, and his ideas were said to bend the future. Yet the achievement he cherished most wasn't his wealth or notoriety. It was the day he met Maya. Maya was a robotics engineer with bright eyes and a warm, steady smile. She believed that technology meant nothing if it didn't protect people, if it didn't put ethics above profits. Ethan fell for her brilliance, for her courage, for the kindness that shaped everything she touched. They worked together, then fell in love, as naturally as breathing. A year later, they married, and Ethan stepped into what he believed would be the happiest chapter of his life. When their daughter Lila was born and diagnosed as deaf, Ethan didn't crumble. He and Maya learned sign language, covered their walls with charts, and turned every corner of their home into a place where hands spoke and light danced. Nights in their household were filled with a tender silence, the kind that wasn't empty, but full of stories told through fingertips and laughter that didn't need sound to exist. For a long time, Ethan believed that with Maya and Lila beside him, he could withstand anything the world threw at him. But the world struck harder than he could ever imagine. Maya was assigned to a joint project between Ward Innovations and Voss Dynamics, the giant dominating autonomous delivery drones. They were preparing to launch Autonomous Skypath, a high-speed drone network flying over crowded city streets. One evening, Maya brought her laptop into the living room and flipped it open to show Ethan the data she'd collected. "Something's wrong," she murmured. On the screen were simulations of drones in heavy rain, and in far too many of them, the drone miscalculated stopping distance, slamming into obstacles as if blind. "This is bad," Ethan said, leaning forward. "Not bad, Ethan." Her voice trembled slightly. "This could kill someone." She submitted her official report. Then a second one. A third, with videos of failed rain tests. Ethan called the Voss Dynamics engineering division directly, pushing to delay the launch. But the most powerful decision didn't belong to engineers. It belonged to Cole Maddox, the company's COO, the man known in Silicon Valley as the Wolf, ruthless, profit-driven, obsessed with stock spikes. "I've looked it over," Cole said on the phone, his tone so cold Ethan felt it through his spine. "Her data isn't strong enough. We can't delay over a few negative simulations." "Those aren't a few simulations," Ethan snapped. "They're warnings." "Ethan, you're a brilliant founder, but you don't run my company." "We will launch on schedule." Maya listened to that conversation, and he knew her heart was sinking, but she wasn't someone who gave up easily. She collected more data. She stood in the rain at the test site to record clearer footage. She sent one last email. "An accident is inevitable. It's only a matter of time." And exactly 1 week later, during a relentless storm, time ran out. Maya left the lab late, clutching a stack of freshly printed test reports. She walked beneath a flickering streetlight when, from above, a test drone, misguided by the flawed algorithm, dropped like a silent shadow of death. Ethan wasn't there. He only heard the details after it was too late. Maya had no chance to run, no warning, no miracle to save her. The impact ended her life, and ended a part of his. The next day, Voss Dynamics deleted logs, buried reports, erased every trace of the flaw. Cole stood before the media, blaming the incident on user error, claiming Maya had been in an unauthorized location, even though she was the very person trying to prevent that disaster. Ethan refused to let her death be rewritten. He sued, he fought, he appealed to every institution that would listen. But massive corporations don't just have money, they have influence, connections, legal teams that can twist truth until it becomes unrecognizable. Ethan's case collapsed. The evidence was deemed insufficient. Maya's death was filed away as a tragic accident. After that, Ethan walked away from Ward Innovations and the world he once built. He shut the doors on unfinished projects, silenced the applause he once received, and retreated into a quiet penthouse overlooking the San Francisco Bay. He no longer cared about investment calls or keynote stages. His world narrowed to Lila, the child with her mother's eyes and a heart that kept him from falling apart completely. He remained a billionaire, at least on paper, but in every way that mattered, he was simply a man learning how to survive in the aftermath of losing the person he loved most. After memories of Maya swept through him like a sharp winter draft, Ethan sat for a long time by the window, watching the city feel farther and farther away. In his hand was Aria Voss's business card. He turned it slowly, wondering whether this woman had any idea of the pain her family's company had inflicted on him. A quiet thought echoed inside him. No one is born cruel. There has to be a reason. Somewhere across the city, another story had been shaping itself for years, the story of the day Aria's world first fell silent. When Aria was 10, an explosion in a laboratory took her mother's life and left a permanent fracture in her hearing, one no doctor could fully repair. Her last memory of her mother was a startled glance over her shoulder, a silent warning, then a blast that shook her entire being. When Aria woke in the hospital, sound reached her distorted, as if traveling from miles away. Her father, Victor Voss, didn't cry or tremble. He simply stood beside her and said, "You must be strong. The world does not accept weakness." From that moment, Aria understood her pain was not something she was allowed to show. Her childhood disappeared, replaced by rigid schedules and hearing therapy sessions that left her skull buzzing. Victor hired the best specialists, not to comfort her, but to shape her into perfection, into someone whose flaws were invisible. She learned sign language but could only use it behind closed doors. She practiced speaking until her throat hurt, hid her hearing aids beneath her blonde hair, learned to stand tall, to stay silent, to never appear tired. At 16, she gathered the courage to ask, "What if I'm not perfect?" Victor answered without hesitation, "Then you'll be crushed." The words followed her like a long shadow. By 30, Aria stood on stage as the new CEO of Voss Dynamics. Flashbulbs burst around her, applause thundered. But to her, the sounds bent strangely, arriving warped and distant, as though coming from a world she could only observe through glass. That night, she returned to her penthouse, removed her hearing aids, and let the world fall into absolute stillness. In the dark, she whispered, "I'm strong." "Right, Father?" Silence answered, the same silence that had shaped her entire life. Within that stillness of night, where Aria sat alone in her dark penthouse, no one knew that across the city, Ethan was staring at the business card bearing the Voss name as if it were a relic of a past he never wanted to touch again. Two people, two worlds, both struggling against wounds they never chose. And just as they each tried to breathe through their own silence, fate began to shift slowly, drawing them closer than either could imagine. 2 days after the morning at the café, while Ethan was making hot cocoa for Lila in their quiet kitchen, the doorbell rang. He wasn't expecting anyone, much less someone tied to the Voss legacy, but when he opened the door, Aria stood there. She looked nothing like the polished CEO, shielded by boardrooms and camera flashes. No tailored coat, no sharp heels, no armor of authority. Just a woman standing on his doorstep, fingers curled gently around her bag strap, hair down, eyes carrying attention she didn't bother hiding. "I'm sorry for coming unannounced," Aria said, her voice deliberate, every word chosen with care. "But I need to speak with you." Ethan didn't invite her in. Seeing the Voss name on his threshold felt like watching a ghost dig its way into the present. But there was no arrogance in Aria's expression, only something unexpectedly human. She drew a steadying breath. "I want to offer you a role as a special consultant on a new project, an AI system that translates sign language into real-time speech. It's not just a technological pursuit. It means something to people like me and to your daughter." The words hit him harder than he expected. For a moment, he saw Maya in his mind, her soft smile, her hands signing bedtime stories to Lila. "I don't work with Voss Dynamics," Ethan replied, his voice cold as steel. "I don't want anything to do with that company." Aria lowered her gaze. "I understand, but I hoped you'd listen, just once." At that moment, Lila appeared from the hallway, curiosity bright in her eyes. She tugged on Ethan's sleeve, then signed slowly, clearly. "Dad, you could help people like me." Ethan looked at his daughter, then at Aria, then at Lila's small hand resting on his arm. Amid all the grief and anger and fear, her signs cut through everything with a purity nothing could dilute. He exhaled, a breath that seemed to release years of heaviness. "All right," he said quietly. I'll come take a look." Aria lifted her head, and for the first time her eyes softened, as if a door in her life had just opened. The morning Ethan returned to Voss Dynamics, fog still drifted lazily over the San Francisco Bay. The company's headquarters rose above the skyline like a blade of glass cutting into the sky. Ethan paused before entering, feeling as though he stood before the very ghost of his past. Cold, heavy, unforgiving. Aria stood beside him, her voice lower, warmer than he'd ever heard it. "If this becomes too much, just tell me. I won't let anyone bother you." Ethan didn't answer. He simply tightened his grip on Lila's small hand, as though she were the anchor keeping him steady as they stepped through the towering glass doors. Inside, the lobby glowed with polished marble and giant LED screens projecting drone flight paths. Immediately, whispers rippled through the space. "Is that Ethan Ward? What's he doing here? Voss invited him?" Ethan didn't look around, but he felt every pair of eyes like a weight pressing on his ribs. Lila couldn't hear the whispers, yet she sensed the tension. She clung to him a little tighter. Aria turned toward the onlookers and spoke with a cutting precision. "He is my consultant. Treat him with respect." Silence dropped like a curtain. Ethan glanced at her, not out of shock, but because it was the first time someone from Voss Dynamics had stood publicly at his side. They rode to the 18th floor, where the research lab buzzed with quiet intensity. When the doors slid open, Ethan felt as if he were stepping back into a different lifetime. The scent of fresh hardware, the rhythmic clicking of keyboards, the blue glow of monitors, it all reminded him of the nights he and Maya had worked side by side in rooms just like this. Aria led him to the main workstation. "Here's the current model. You can start wherever you want." Ethan opened the code. His pulse stilled. The comments, the structure, even the joint mapping method, everything carried Maya's unmistakable touch. "Maya worked like this," he whispered. Aria didn't move. She seemed afraid to break the moment. Ethan inhaled deeply and began typing. At first his fingers trembled, but soon they moved with a familiar certainty. With every adjustment, every test, every refinement, he felt himself reconnecting with the part of him that existed before tragedy. The creator, not the broken man. In the corner, Lila colored and wandered around, signing questions that made engineers laugh. Her presence warmed the room in a way no technology ever could. When Ethan saved his first update, he realized the old pain inside him was still there. But for the first time in years, it wasn't just hurting. It was healing. While Ethan was reviewing the final lines of code in the signal processing module, the lab was still filled with the rhythm of keyboards and the cold white glow reflecting off polished metal surfaces. Lila giggled in the corner as a young engineer showed her how a robot's joints moved, and Aria stood behind Ethan with quiet satisfaction at how seamlessly he had integrated into the project. Everything felt steady, almost peaceful, until the air shifted, as if a cold draft swept through the hallway and straight into the room. The lab door swung open and Cole Maddox stepped inside. No introduction was necessary. His presence alone drained warmth from the air. Dark charcoal suit, slicked back hair, eyes the color of winter steel. He scanned the room with the casual arrogance of someone who believed he owned the space. Then his gaze locked onto Ethan. "Well?" Cole drawled, a mocking smile curling at the corner of his mouth. "I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Turns out the rumors were true. Ethan Ward, crawling back into the company he once tried to burn to the ground." Silence dropped over the lab. A few engineers bowed their heads toward their screens, trying to disappear. Ethan rose slowly, not aggressive, but coiled, like a wire pulled too tight. "I was invited here," he said, voice steady, dangerously calm. "You have nothing to do with it." Cole stepped closer, still smirking. "I'm simply wondering how a man who, failed so spectacularly, feels walking into the empire he tried to destroy. His gaze drifted to Lila standing near a table of robot prototypes. And bringing your little deaf girl along for the sympathy points? A cold spike shot through Ethan's spine. Lila didn't hear the words, but she felt the hostility. Her small hands paused mid-air. Aria moved instantly, stepping between them. Her voice wasn't loud, but sharp enough to split stone. Cole, you have no right to speak about her like that, and you certainly have no right to insult my consultant. Consultant? Cole laughed, hollow and cruel. Aria, you're staking this company's credibility on a man who let his emotions destroy his career. Emotions aren't weakness, Aria replied, eyes locked on his. The fact that you can't understand that is exactly the problem. A thick silence settled. Power clashed with truth right in the center of the room. Cole leaned in, lowering his voice to a threat. You'll regret this. He turned sharply and walked out, leaving the door wide open behind him. The air seemed to shatter as he left. Ethan clenched his fists, fighting the fury rising in waves. Aria glanced toward him, her expression composed but trembling at the edges, as if Cole's words had hit a part of her she rarely let anyone see. I'm sorry, she whispered. I should have known he'd react like that. Ethan shook his head, eyes softening as Lila approached him. It's not your fault. But deep inside, he knew one thing with unsettling clarity. This confrontation was only the beginning, and Cole Maddox wouldn't stop. After Cole stormed out of the lab, the air remained thick, heavy like gunpowder smoke. People returned to their workstations, but no one truly worked. Ethan stood still beside the desk, hearing nothing but his own heartbeat pounding against his ribs. Lila clung to his arm, sensing the tension even though she couldn't hear the words. Aria stayed frozen for a moment, her breath tight as if she had just escaped a storm. Shall we continue? Aria asked, her voice thinner than usual, fragile, almost trembling. Ethan nodded. One thing he understood clearly. Cole never appeared just to throw meaningless threats. He always had a purpose. And that thought rekindled the old suspicion Ethan had tried to bury for years. Later that night, while Lila slept curled on the sofa in the corner of the lab, a habit she picked up because she loved staying close to her father, Ethan sat in front of the Voss Dynamics terminal. The soft blue glow washed over his face, revealing lines of exhaustion he had never admitted to himself. He glanced at Aria, sleeping in the chair across the room, her coat draped over her shoulders, her face still tense even in rest. She had spent hours organizing files for him, and Ethan recognized that she was fighting her own demons too. He returned to the screen. A familiar instinct rose within him, a whisper from Maya. Look deeper. Ethan opened the internal system logs. Voss Dynamics had strong security, but he had been the one designing much of the architecture back when Ward Innovations collaborated with them. He knew where the invisible cracks were. Minutes later, a dim, unmarked folder appeared in the deepest layer of the database. No name, no description, restricted access. Strange. Too strange. His heart thudded faster. He typed a long string of commands, locked the lab's firewall, and activated an anonymous protocol. The folder opened. Inside, a list of files dropped into view, like cold stones into his stomach. Drone flight logs, crash data, deleted video files, failed simulations, and finally, emails. Emails Maya had written, warnings she sent, data she pushed to Cole. Pleas for delaying the launch. Ethan read line after line, his hands trembling. Then he saw it. A text file. Cole Maddox's signature. One sentence. Erase everything. Leave no trace. Ethan collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. His breath hitched, tight and painful. This was the evidence he had sought for years. The truth he always knew, but could never prove. But seeing it now brought no relief, only the rebirth of a wound he thought time had numbed. He turned toward Lila, sleeping peacefully, curled up like something too small to protect. If he exposed everything, would she become collateral damage in a war she didn't deserve? He whispered into the dark, "You're all I have left. Maya, tell me what to do." A soft voice broke the silence. "Ethan?" He looked up. Aria stood behind him, hair mussed, eyes heavy with worry. She wasn't the CEO now. She wasn't the heir of a tech empire. She was simply a woman afraid of what she might be about to learn. Ethan pointed to the screen. "You need to see this." Aria stepped closer. When her eyes fell on the files, on the logs, the data, Maya's emails, then Cole's sentence, her face drained of color. She covered her mouth with her hand, stifling a cry. "My father," she whispered, voice breaking. "He knew. I heard them argue once. My father told Cole to handle it quietly. I knew something was wrong, but I was too scared to ask." "Aria." Ethan's voice wasn't angry or accusing. It held only a deep, aching sadness. "You knew, and you stayed silent." Aria broke down. For the first time, she didn't hide her tears. Everything she had held together her entire life, her strength, her mask, her armor, fell apart piece by piece. "I was weak," she sobbed. "I let my father define who I was. I feared him. I feared losing everything. I feared fighting back and being crushed, like everyone always warned me." Ethan looked at her, long and steady. Then he placed his hand on the desk and said quietly, "We can't change the past, but we can continue what Maya tried to do." Aria lifted her head, eyes red and wet. "You mean, find the truth and stop them from burying it again?" Aria nodded, a trembling nod, but stronger than any decision she had made. In that moment, under the pale glow of the monitor, two people who had once lived on opposite sides of pain found themselves standing on the same path. An unexpected alliance was formed, and for the first time, silence became their ally, not their prison. A few days after Ethan and Aria discovered the hidden folder, Voss Dynamics felt as if it were holding its breath. No one said anything directly, but rumors crept through hallways, slipping into half-finished conversations. At the center of the tension was Cole, the spark to the fire. He whispered to board members that Aria was losing control, that the AI project was swerving because of her personal emotions, and that she was involved with Ethan Ward. Tabloids pounced immediately. "CEO linked to man who sued the company?" Aria slammed her phone on the table, eyes burning with anger more than embarrassment. Ethan stood beside her, chest tightening. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice shook. "People always fear women who know what they want." That afternoon, the board called an emergency meeting. Ethan was blocked outside the glass door, watching Aria stand alone in a room full of cold faces. Arguments erupted, voices rising, chairs scraping. Then the chairman stood and delivered the sentence. "Aria Voss, you must temporarily step down." Aria shot back instantly. "I did nothing wrong." They voted. 3 minutes, and she was removed. When Ethan tried to enter, security placed a firm hand on his chest. "Your contract is terminated. Please leave the building." Lila ran to him, panic written on her face. Ethan knelt, signing slowly. "We didn't do anything wrong. We did what's right." 2 days later, the small temporary apartment was a maze of boxes and quiet. Ethan packed silently, trying not to think about the shrinking future in front of them. Lila sat beside one of her mother's old storage bins, then suddenly held up a small scratched silver USB, her eyes lighting up. "Mom's," she signed. Ethan took it, heart clenching when he saw Maya's handwriting. For Ethan. He plugged it in. A video appeared. Maya recording herself 3 days before she died. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were steady. "Ethan, if you're watching this, things are out of control." She turned the camera toward error logs, failed crash simulations, a drone slamming into a barrier in the rain. Everything Ethan had searched for and never found. When the final crash footage played, Ethan broke. He collapsed over the desk, sobbing, the kind of sound pulled from a place he thought had gone silent forever. Lila placed her small hand on his arm, her eyes warm but impossibly sad. "Mom wanted to tell the truth," she signed. Ethan pulled her into his arms, tears falling into her hair. "Yes," he whispered. "She did." He stood, wiped his face, picked up his phone. "Aria," he said when she answered, his voice steady in a way that scared even him. "Maya left us evidence. We finally have a real chance." When Aria heard Ethan say the words, "Maya's evidence," the line went silent. Not a breath, not a rustle, just the stillness of a lake waiting for the rain to break it. Then her voice came back, low but steady. "Send it to me. All of it. I'll handle the rest." And with that, the fragile piece around Voss Dynamics began to splinter like glass. Aria barely slept that night. She called 3 journalists whose integrity was ironclad. They watched Maya's video, the logs, the simulations, Cole's directive. None of them spoke for several seconds, the kind of silence reserved for moments when a truth too heavy to swallow has just surfaced. They all understood. This wasn't just a corporate scandal. This was evidence tied to a death. By morning, the FBI arrived at the temporary apartment where Ethan and Lila were staying. 2 agents stepped inside. No theatrics, no intimidation, just sharp eyes that seemed to see through Ethan's grief. They reviewed every file, every timestamp, every digital signature. Nothing was fake. Nothing was altered. Everything aligned. "We'll open an official investigation immediately," Agent Turner said, voice cool as steel. Within hours, the news exploded. Social media burned with speculation. Tech networks ran back-to-back segments. Investors panicked, and somewhere above all of it, Cole Maddox scrambled for control, appearing on every channel possible, smiling through clenched teeth. "These files may be fabricated," he insisted. "This is a coordinated attack." But the tremor in his eyes said otherwise, and everyone could see it. 3 days later, the annual shareholders' meeting filled the largest hall of Voss Dynamics. Media lined the aisles. Flashing cameras lit the room like violent stars. Investors sank into their seats with dread tightening their jaws. Something was coming. They could feel it in the electric hum across the room. Cole stood on stage, weaving a speech about a bright future, innovation, vision. His voice rang hollow, metallic, stretched thin by panic. Then the doors at the back of the hall opened. Aria stepped in first. Ethan beside her. Lila between them, her small hand holding her father's with quiet strength. Every whisper died. Cole froze mid-sentence. "Aria, you have no authority." She didn't answer, didn't look at him. She simply lifted her hands and removed her hearing aids, a slow, deliberate motion like shedding the last layer of armor she never wanted to wear in the first place. The stage lights reflected in her eyes, making them shine. Strong, stripped bare, resolute. She walked to the center of the stage and began to sign. Instantly, the sign-to-voice AI system, Ethan's system, recognized her movements. A clear voice filled the hall, steady and unbroken, as if it were her own. "This company silenced the truth, and today, silence will speak back." The massive screen behind her lit up. Not abruptly, not chaotically. Maya's video emerged like a memory rising from deep water. She sat in her lab, the warm light softening the exhaustion on her face, but not the determination in her eyes. She explained the system flaw, the danger, the warnings she issued. Then the test footage appeared, the camera shaking as the drone lost control, crashed into the barrier, the impact echoing like a blade splitting steel. The room did not explode instantly. It held its breath for 2 beats. And then everything shattered. Investors shouted. Microphones cracked with feedback. Cameras fired like a storm of lightning. People stood, pointed, argued, demanded answers. The truth had been dropped into the heart of a kingdom built on lies, and everyone watched it begin to collapse. The FBI entered the hall. The crowd parted like water. 2 agents walked straight to Cole. He stumbled backward, his mask tearing open. "Cole Maddox," Agent Turner announced, voice cutting through the chaos. "You are under arrest for fraud, evidence tampering, and negligent homicide." No, you don't understand. The click of the handcuffs was louder than his protests. It echoed across the hall and silenced everything else. Aria watched him being led away, tears sliding down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them. Instead, she lifted her hands again and signed, slowly, painfully, beautifully. Maya Ward tried to save lives, and today, I give her voice back. The AI's voice filled the room, deep and resonant. Ethan looked at Aria, something tightening in his chest. Lila squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with emotion. The storm had come. And for the first time, silence was not something to fear, but the strongest voice in the room. After that chaotic shareholders' meeting, after Cole was handcuffed in front of hundreds of cameras, their lives didn't suddenly become easier. But something had shifted, like the air after a storm, humid, quiet, but filled with the promise of something new. And from that quiet, a new chapter began for Ethan, Lila, and Aria. A few weeks later, on a morning so clear it looked like someone had polished the entire sky, Ethan brought Lila to the hospital for her cochlear implant activation. The Maya Ward Foundation covered everything. Aria arrived early, standing silently by the door with her hand on Lila's shoulder, telling her without words that she wasn't alone. When the device turned on for the first time, the small room held nothing but the beeping of monitors and Ethan's anxious breathing. Lila blinked, her shoulders trembling. Then she turned toward Ethan the moment she heard his voice, soft and steady, but whole for the first time in her life. "I'm right here, sweetheart." Lila burst into tears, first small, trembling drops, then full sobs she couldn't hold back. She opened her mouth, her voice barely above a whisper, fragile like morning light. "Dad, you sound like light." Ethan pulled her into his arms, and Aria watched from behind, hand over her mouth, tears filling her eyes. She had never seen life shift so beautifully, a child hearing the world for the first time, a father reclaiming something he thought he had lost forever. Time moved forward. Wounds began to knit back together. Ethan used part of the settlement money to buy a small cafe on a quiet corner, an old space with sunlight that fell just right every morning. He transformed it into a haven for the deaf community. Every staff member knew sign language, the menus had Braille, and mornings were quiet hours for people sensitive to sound. Slowly, the cafe became an oasis in a loud and hurried city. One afternoon, Aria walked in. She wasn't wearing her hearing aids. Her hair was loose. Her expression was lighter, as though she had finally set down a burden she'd carried all her life. Ethan looked up and smiled, the kind of smile no longer shadowed by grief. Aria signed, "Oat milk latte." "Always," Ethan signed back. Lila ran from behind the counter and threw her arms around Aria, the cochlear implant glinting under the warm light. Aria hugged her tight, smiling with a brightness that softened the entire room. The three of them sat by the window, where the afternoon sun stretched across the table like a warm blanket. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Ethan's hand touched Aria's. Lila placed her small hand gently over both of theirs, 3 heartbeats settling into the same rhythm. Lila looked up and signed the words her mother once engraved on a silver bracelet. "Listen with your heart." Ethan smiled softly. Aria closed her eyes. Outside, the city continued rushing, noisy and restless, but inside the little cafe, time paused in perfect quiet. And from that quiet, a new journey began, a future no longer afraid of darkness, because light had finally found its way back into their lives.